Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. The soft murmur of morning activity in Soho did little to disturb the usual quietude of the café where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings were seated. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the hum of distant chatter, and the clinking of cutlery against porcelain. Poirot, ever the meticulous eater, carefully adjusted his napkin before beginning his breakfast. He eyed his croissant as if it had somehow offended him, though his fastidious nature left little room for anything but approval. Hastings, meanwhile, was absorbed in the morning paper, his brow furrowed in the way he did when he encountered a mystery, though more often than not, it was the football scores or a piece of gossip that caught his attention. Ah, Hastings, Poirot sighed dramatically, looking over the rim of his coffee cup. Another day, another hour of, how do you say? Boredom. The mind. She longs for something stimulating, something challenging, yet nothing of interest presents itself. The criminals of London have grown so unimaginative, n'est-ce pas? Hastings glanced up from the paper, a slight grin tugging at his lips. Well, Poirot, there's this bit about Blackwood Manor in Dorset. Strange occurrences, they say. A haunted house, apparently. Maybe it's the sort of mystery you've been waiting for. Poirot's eyes sparkled as he leaned forward, a gleam of interest in his gaze. A haunted house, you say? A most intriguing proposition. But what is it that haunts this place? A ghost? Or perhaps something more insidious? He pursed his lips in thought. There is always a human hand behind the mask of the spectre. Hastings, not fully comprehending Poirot's excitement, returned his attention to the paper. It's more of the usual. Cold spots, strange sounds, objects moved about the house. It seems to be quite the mystery. Poirot set his coffee cup down with a soft clink. Ah, my friend, you underestimate the drama that lies behind these tales. When people believe in ghosts, it is not the supernatural that they fear. It is the mind, our deepest fears, our darkest motives that hides in the shadows, and it is this that I must unveil. With a dramatic flourish, Poirot stood, his little hands brushing down his coat as he fixed Hastings with a look of determination. We will visit this Blackwood Manor, Hastings, for I sense a riddle waiting to be unravelled. As the pair prepared to leave the café, a voice, sharp yet tinged with desperation, interrupted their conversation. Monsieur Poirot? They turned to see a young woman standing at the entrance, her face pale and eyes wide with distress. She was dressed in an elegant coat of deep green, though it did little to conceal the air of worry that clung to her every movement. She was striking, her posture betraying a sense of urgency. Yes? Poirot inquired, his voice calm, yet with a hint of curiosity. You seek me? Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, she replied quickly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. I have heard of your extraordinary skills. I beg you, please, you must come to my family's estate. It is a matter of great importance. My name is Miss Lavinia Blackwood. Poirot observed her carefully, his sharp eyes noting the subtle tremor of her hands as she held a delicate lace handkerchief. And what brings you to me, mademoiselle? Surely such beauty should not be marred by distress, he said with a slight smile, though his tone was as sharp as ever. Miss Blackwood hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking nervously toward the door, as though half expecting someone to follow her. My family's home, Blackwood Manor, is plagued, she whispered, her voice low but filled with dread. There are occurrences that cannot be explained, Monsieur Poirot. Voices in the night, cold winds, objects missing. I fear it is no simple haunting. Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A haunting, you say? But what is it that haunts Blackwood Manor, Miss Blackwood? A spirit, or perhaps something more human in nature? She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. I cannot say, but I believe someone in my family is trying to drive me mad, or worse. Please, Monsieur Poirot, I beg you, you are the only one who can help. Poirot exchanged a quick glance with Hastings, who looked bemused but intrigued. Poirot's lips curved into a small smile as he stood straighter, his gaze never leaving Miss Blackwood. Very well, Mademoiselle Blackwood. We shall come to your manor, but remember, I do not believe in ghosts, only in the tricks that the human mind plays. Miss Lavinia Blackwood sat in front of Poirot and Hastings, her delicate fingers clutching the lace handkerchief she had been twisting in her hands since she entered the café. The tension in her posture was palpable, and her eyes flickered nervously as she spoke. It was clear that the weight of her words, whatever they might be, was not easy for her to carry. Monsieur Poirot, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, there is more to the occurrences at Blackwood Manor than mere superstition. I have reason to believe that someone in my family is trying to drive me mad, or worse. Poirot, who had been listening intently, raised an eyebrow and leaned forward, his trademark intensity in his gaze. Madness? Mademoiselle, it is not often that I encounter a case of such magnitude. You must tell me all, without fear or hesitation. She paused, swallowing hard, as if gathering the courage to speak the words that had haunted her thoughts. 2 months ago, my uncle, Colonel Oswald Blackwood, died suddenly. It was a shock to us all, but there was something off about the circumstances. She glanced down at her lap, then back up at Poirot. Before he passed away, he changed his will. I was to inherit Blackwood Manor, but shortly after his death, the new will disappeared. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, but his mind was already working, turning over the details she had provided. A will, mademoiselle, that disappears. How intriguing. Tell me, is it possible that your uncle had enemies? People who might stand to gain from your misfortune? Lavinia's eyes darkened as she nodded. My cousin, Lord Adrian Blackwood, is eager to claim the manor for himself. He stands to inherit everything if I am declared unfit or disappear. Ah, so the haunting may be a method to unseat you from your rightful inheritance, Poirot observed, his voice calm yet charged with interest. A clever strategy indeed, but tell me, Mademoiselle Blackwood, what evidence do you have that this is more than just the fancies of an overactive mind? She lowered her voice, her eyes glancing nervously toward the door, as though she feared someone might overhear. I know someone is tampering with my mind, Monsieur Poirot. The strange occurrences at the manor, they are no accident. Someone wants to make me believe in ghosts, but I know better. They want me to leave, and I believe it is all connected to the will. Poirot sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin, his sharp eyes locked onto hers, studying her closely. Mademoiselle Blackwood, you are correct. I do not believe in ghosts, but I do believe that there is a human hand behind this mischief. We shall go to Blackwood Manor and uncover the truth. Poirot's words hung in the air, the weight of his decision settling like a quiet promise. Hastings, who had been listening intently, let out a small sigh of relief. He had expected Poirot to take the case, but even so, hearing the detective's words aloud seemed to confirm that they were once again on the cusp of a new and intriguing adventure. Mademoiselle, you have come to the right person, Poirot continued, his voice rich with theatrical gravitas. Ghosts, they do not exist. What exists, mademoiselle, is the human mind, its fears, its weaknesses, and its desires. These are the true forces at work, pulling the strings behind the veil of the unknown. Lavinia nodded, though her anxious expression didn't waver. "I'm so glad you believe in me, Monsieur Poirot. But I fear I will not find peace until I know the truth." Poirot smiled gently, though there was a sharpness in his eyes. "Rest assured, mademoiselle, we shall uncover the truth. But first, I must tell you something. The hauntings, as you have described them, cold spots, strange sounds, things disappearing, are all carefully calculated distractions. The real crime is something far more insidious. Someone seeks to manipulate you, to make you doubt yourself, to sow confusion and fear." Hastings, who had been silently observing, cleared his throat. "But Poirot, ghosts or no ghosts, this sounds like a rather daunting mystery." Poirot turned to him with a smile, his eyes twinkling. "Ah, Hastings, you still cling to the supernatural. But it is the human mind that is the most complicated and deceitful instrument of all. We must look beyond the obvious, my friend." Lavinia's gaze softened, but the worry in her eyes did not fade. Poirot, ever the calming presence, stood up, adjusting his coat with a flourish. "We shall go to Blackwood Manor immediately. Prepare yourself, mademoiselle. The mystery awaits us." As they stood to leave the café, Hastings glanced at Poirot, shaking his head with a bemused expression. "I'll never quite get used to how you do that, Poirot. You speak with such confidence, and yet it's all about what people don't say, isn't it?" Poirot, with a slight chuckle, replied, "Precisely, Hastings. You see, the mind tells more through its silence than through its words." He gave Lavinia a reassuring smile, though his thoughts were already whirring with the possibilities of what awaited them at Blackwood Manor. The carriage rolled slowly over the uneven dirt road, the fog thickening with every passing moment, as if the earth itself was swallowing up the world around them. Blackwood Manor loomed ahead like a spectre, its towering walls nearly hidden by creeping ivy, its windows staring out like dark, unblinking eyes. The distant howls of the wind added an eerie soundtrack to their arrival. "Mon ami, Hastings, do you see? This place, she has a certain atmosphere," Poirot remarked, his eyes twinkling with interest, though his tone was far from reassured. "There is a heaviness in the air, yes? The very land seems to tremble with secrets." Hastings, ever the pragmatist, shifted uneasily in his seat as the carriage wheels crunched over gravel. "I've certainly never seen anything quite like it. Looks like it's straight out of a ghost story." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Ah, ghosts. How predictable, my friend. But no, this is not a story of spirits. This is the story of human hands, pushing, pulling, and twisting events to their advantage." The carriage came to a halt with a soft jolt in front of the manor's grand entrance, and the driver quickly dismounted to open the door for them. As they stepped out, the damp air clung to their coats, and the scent of earth and decay lingered in the silence. "Bienvenue, messieurs," came a low voice from the shadows, and a figure emerged from the dark doorway of the manor. A tall man, with a thin face and sharp features, dressed in formal black attire. He bowed slightly, though his expression was unreadable. "I am the butler here at Blackwood Manor. You are most welcome, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Rowena has been expecting you." Poirot surveyed the manor, his sharp eyes noting every detail, from the overgrown ivy to the unsettling stillness of the grounds. "I am certain she has," Poirot said with a quiet confidence, glancing toward the butler. "We are here to investigate. I trust everything is in order." The butler's face remained composed, though a flicker of something, nervousness perhaps, crossed his features. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. The household is ready for your visit." As they made their way up the stone steps toward the grand entrance, Poirot couldn't help but feel that the very stones beneath their feet whispered of hidden stories. But as always, his focus was sharp. No time for fantasy, only the cold logic of investigation. Hastings followed, his own unease growing, but he kept his thoughts to himself, for he knew better than to question Poirot at such moments. Inside Blackwood Manor, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and something that hinted of mildew, an air of neglect that seemed to seep from the very walls. The grand hall stretched before them, dimly lit by flickering candlelight, its high ceilings and grand chandeliers casting long, jagged shadows upon the cold stone floor. Everywhere they looked, there was evidence of the house's age. The creak of the floorboards beneath their feet, the faintest sound of something shifting within the walls. Poirot walked ahead with his usual meticulous poise, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the room, taking in the slightest detail. Hastings, trailing behind, couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He'd never been particularly fond of old, sprawling estates like this one, with their endless corridors and dark corners that seemed to hold secrets better left undiscovered. As they moved further into the hall, they were greeted by the first of the Blackwood family, Lady Rowena Blackwood, the widow of the late Colonel. She was tall and slender, her once beautiful features now hardened by years of grief and worry. Her eyes, however, held a certain sharpness, an intelligence that belied her delicate appearance. She gave them a curt nod as she stepped forward to welcome them. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Rowena said, her voice cool and formal. "I trust your journey was uneventful." Poirot gave her a polite smile, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he studied her. "The journey, madame, was quite enjoyable. But now let us see if we can bring some light to the shadows of this manor." Lady Rowena didn't reply immediately, her lips tight as if she were holding back something she wished to say. Instead, she motioned for them to follow her down the hall. "I will take you to the drawing room. It is better there, I think, for discussing matters of importance." As they moved toward the drawing room, Poirot's attention shifted to the next member of the household, a tall man, somewhat dishevelled, standing by the window. Lord Adrian Blackwood, Lavinia's cousin, stood staring out over the grounds, his back to them. He turned only when Lady Rowena introduced him with a curt nod. Lord Adrian's eyes were hard and calculating, though there was an odd tension in his posture. He gave Poirot a stiff handshake, his grip far firmer than one might expect from someone of his aristocratic upbringing. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice as cold as his eyes, "I understand you are here to solve a mystery." Poirot studied him carefully, his gaze sharp. "Indeed, Lord Adrian, there is always more to a mystery than first meets the eye." "Perhaps," Lord Adrian replied, "but not all mysteries should be solved. Some things are better left untouched." Poirot's lips curled into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Ah, but it is precisely in the things that are hidden, monsieur, that the truth often lies." Before Lord Adrian could respond, a soft voice interrupted the exchange. Miss Greta Lamson, the Colonel's nurse, entered the room, her presence filling the space in a way that made the air feel even heavier. She was a woman of quiet dignity, though there was something in her eyes, a weariness, a sadness, that made Poirot pause. "Ah, Miss Lamson," Poirot said, giving her a warm smile. "You are the one who cared for the late Colonel Blackwood, yes?" She nodded, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I cared for him in his final days. But I fear he was not entirely himself in those last months." "Ah, yes," Poirot said thoughtfully. "That is always a most delicate matter, is it not? The mind, so fragile, so easily distorted by fears and illusions." Greta's gaze shifted slightly, as if she were unwilling to meet his eyes for too long. It was difficult to know if what he said was the truth or his imagination playing tricks. Poirot's eyes flickered with interest, though his expression remained impassive. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A man who begins to fear his own mind. How telling." The tension in the room was palpable as the last member of the household entered, Dr. Felix Wynne, the family physician. He was a man of peculiar habits, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Dr. Wynne greeted Poirot with a stiff nod, though he didn't make eye contact immediately. "I understand you are here to investigate?" Dr. Wynne's voice was quiet, but there was a certain sharpness to it, as though he were ever so slightly on edge. "Indeed, Doctor," Poirot replied smoothly. "I am here to uncover the truth, whatever it may be." As Poirot turned to face the group, his eyes scanning each of them in turn, Hastings couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. There was something amiss in this house, a tension that simmered just beneath the surface. He knew Poirot had noticed it too. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze lingering on each member of the household as he addressed them. "Now, my friends, we must begin. There are many questions to be answered, but remember this. It is not only the obvious answers that we must seek. It is the ones hidden behind those answers, in the shadows where the truth lies." Poirot sat quietly in the drawing room of Blackwood Manor, his sharp eyes moving from one family member to the next. The heavy air in the room was charged with an unspoken tension that seemed to settle in the corners like dust, each individual hiding something, each gesture a clue in its own right. He could see it in the way Lady Rowena's fingers tightened around her teacup, in the way Greta kept averting her gaze when she thought no one was looking, and in the nervous energy that Adrian seemed to radiate despite his calm exterior. The storm of suspicion was thick, but Poirot knew better than to jump to conclusions without observing every detail. Hastings, who had been quietly nursing his own cup of tea, seemed less subtle in his approach. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "there's something odd about this place. I've been here only an hour and already I feel uneasy. Everyone here seems to be on edge, especially Lady Rowena." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Ah, Hastings, you are quick to sense what lies beneath the surface. But this is no mere unease. It is the product of human nature. Greed, fear, and ambition play their roles behind every smile and every polite word." Hastings, though still unsure of how Poirot managed to unravel the complexities of the human soul, nodded thoughtfully. "But Poirot, you don't really think it's about the manor, do you? I mean, everyone seems to be accusing each other of something, but nobody's talking about the will, which is what started this whole thing." Poirot's gaze flicked toward Lady Rowena, who was now staring out of the window, her expression unreadable. "Indeed, Hastings, the missing will. That is the crux of this whole mystery. But it is not just the will that is missing, mon ami. It is trust, loyalty, and the very essence of family. These people are not simply worried about inheritance. They are concerned about their place in a very delicate power structure. Adrian, he who stands to inherit everything if Mademoiselle Lavinia is removed from the equation, has more than just familial affection driving him. And Mrs. Rowena? Ah, her resentment towards her late husband's will, no doubt. She may have been written out, you see." Hastings, now more intrigued, leaned forward. "But you really think they could go to such lengths? I mean, these are respectable people." Poirot leaned back, a smile playing on his lips as he sipped his tea, savouring the dramatic pause before speaking. "The respectability, my friend, is the mask they wear. Underneath, they are no different than anyone else. Ambitious, desperate, and when it comes to wealth, merciless." Poirot's gaze turned back toward the family members. each one holding their secrets tight, unwilling or unable to share their true thoughts. It was clear to Poirot that the dynamics at play here were more than just a matter of inheritance. They were a matter of survival. But who was truly at risk? The game was far from over. Later that evening, as the last of the daylight was swallowed by the darkening sky, Poirot and Hastings found themselves in the drawing room once more, this time with a far more peculiar atmosphere surrounding them. Lady Rowena had retired for the night, and Miss Lamson had taken her leave, but Lord Adrian was still present. He had excused himself earlier, claiming a need to study his occult collection in the Manor's library, but as Poirot and Hastings were quietly conversing, they heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The door to the drawing room creaked open, and in stepped Lord Adrian. But this time, something was distinctly different about him. His clothes were dishevelled, his tie loosened, and there was a strange intensity in his eyes. He was holding a small old book in his hand, one that appeared to be covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. "Monsieur Poirot," Adrian said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "I trust I am not disturbing you." Poirot's sharp eyes quickly scanned the situation, his expression unreadable. "Not at all, Lord Adrian. But I must ask, what is this that you hold in your hands?" His gaze narrowed, his suspicions immediately aroused. Lord Adrian looked down at the book, his fingers lightly brushing the cover. "Ah, this. A mere relic of my family's past," he replied, though there was a strange note of unease in his voice. "It's nothing of importance. Just a ritual book." Poirot's interest piqued at the word ritual. "A ritual book, you say? And what sort of rituals does this book describe, may I ask? Surely, monsieur, you do not believe in such superstitions?" Adrian's eyes flickered, and for a moment his usual composed demeanour faltered. "It is not superstition," he said quickly, almost defensively. "It is history, family tradition. We perform rituals to connect with the past, to understand the forces that shape our present." Poirot's sharp gaze never wavered. "Ah, I see. And what forces are these, Lord Adrian? What do you seek to control with your occult practices?" Lord Adrian hesitated, his eyes darting toward the large windows as if searching for something outside. "I do not seek to control anything, but sometimes it is necessary to understand these things, to protect oneself." Poirot, though still composed, could not help but sense the deeper undercurrent of fear beneath Adrian's words. "Protect oneself, you say? From whom, monsieur? Or should I say, from what?" Adrian's lips tightened, and for a moment the room was filled with an oppressive silence. He looked as though he wanted to say more, but stopped himself. Instead, he closed the book with a soft snap, tucking it under his arm. "Forgive me," Adrian said after a pause. "I've been much too anxious lately. I suppose I'll take my leave now." As he exited the room, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes glinting with a new understanding. "Ah, Hastings, the plot thickens. This ritual, it is a smokescreen, mon ami, a distraction perhaps, or does it hint at something far darker beneath the surface?" Hastings blinked, still trying to wrap his head around the idea of occult rituals in a respectable family estate. "You think it's connected to the will?" Poirot smiled cryptically. "All things are connected, my friend. The question is, how?" The evening had settled over Blackwood Manor like a thick cloak, its oppressive weight pressing upon the inhabitants within. Poirot, though undisturbed by the eerie atmosphere that seemed to permeate every corner of the old estate, couldn't help but notice how the family members behaved, each one retreating into their own world of suspicion, fear, and, in some cases, guilt. It was in this mood that Greta Lampson, the Colonel's former nurse, made her way into the drawing room. Her face was pale, and she moved as though each step took more effort than the last. She sat in a chair opposite Poirot, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if to keep them from trembling. "Mon Dieu, Miss Lamson," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet firm. "I have been told that you have been hearing strange sounds. Is that true?" Greta's lips pressed into a thin line before she nodded slowly. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I have heard the Colonel's voice. It calls to me at night." She shuddered, though not from the cold. "I've heard it for several nights now. Sometimes it is just a whisper, barely audible, but other times it is as if he is standing right next to me, speaking clearly." Poirot's gaze narrowed as he studied her, his mind racing with the possibilities. "And what does this voice say to you, Miss Lamson? Does it speak of the past, or perhaps the future?" Greta looked up sharply, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. "No, Monsieur Poirot, it is not that kind of voice. It calls my name, and sometimes it says—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It says, 'They are coming for you.'" Poirot leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "Ah, they are coming for you. A very cryptic message indeed, mademoiselle. And have you seen anything else? A figure? A shadow? A movement in the dark?" Greta shook her head, her gaze fixed on the floor. "No, nothing like that. But I feel watched, as though someone is always near, even when I am alone." Poirot's mind clicked into place. "It is not the voice that concerns me, Miss Lamson. It is the fear it causes in you. You feel threatened, yes, but is it by the voice, or by something far more human?" Before she could answer, the door opened abruptly, and Dr. Felix Wynne entered. He was wearing his customary expression of unease, his thin lips set in a firm line. "Ah, Dr. Wynne," Poirot said smoothly, his eyes assessing the man in front of him. "I was just speaking to Miss Lamson about the voices she has heard. Surely, as a physician, you might offer an explanation." Dr. Wynne's face tightened, and he stepped forward, his fingers twitching slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I have heard of these occurrences. But I must tell you, Poirot, there is a far simpler explanation. The Colonel's mental state deteriorated before his death. He suffered from hallucinations, visions, voices. It is not so unusual." Poirot's eyes glinted with a knowing look. "Hallucinations? But surely, if it were only a matter of the mind, we would not have such vivid details, n'est-ce pas?" Dr. Wynne faltered for a moment before regaining his composure. "I merely state the facts, Poirot. There is no need for further speculation." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "I beg to differ, mon ami. I believe the truth is far stranger than mere medical explanations." The tension in Blackwood Manor had only grown since Poirot's arrival, and the events of the previous night only added to the growing sense of unease. Lavinia Blackwood, who had appeared composed and eager for answers, had become increasingly agitated as the haunting seemed to escalate. The unsettling noises, the inexplicable cold spots, and the inexplicable disappearance of various objects from the manor were now compounded by something far more disturbing. It was late in the evening when Lavinia came to Poirot in a state of visible distress. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. She was clutching something tightly in her hand, a small, ornate object that gleamed even in the dim light of the drawing room. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, "you must come at once. Something has happened. Something I cannot explain." Poirot stood from his chair, his calm demeanour unwavering. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Blackwood, what has happened?" Lavinia opened her hand to reveal the object she was holding, a signet ring, one that Poirot recognised instantly. It was the late Colonel Blackwood's. "The Colonel's ring!" Lavinia exclaimed. It was in my bed. It was placed there, carefully, as if someone wanted me to find it. But I have no idea how it got there. Poirot's mind raced. He immediately took the ring, inspecting it carefully before placing it in his pocket. It seems that someone is trying to manipulate you, mademoiselle. But why leave such an obvious clue? Before Lavinia could respond, a loud commotion echoed through the halls, followed by a harsh voice. Poirot and Lavinia rushed toward the source of the noise, only to find the household in turmoil. "Mr. Priddle!" came a cry from one of the servants. "He's gone! Disappeared!" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Gone, you say? How can that be? And where are the others?" The servant seemed at a loss for words, but Poirot's mind was already piecing together the puzzle. "There is no time to waste. We must investigate immediately." The search for Mr. Eustace Priddle, the family solicitor, led them to his study. But when they arrived, it was clear that something sinister had occurred. The room was in disarray, papers were scattered across the floor, and a dark stain marked the desk. Blood. Poirot knelt down to inspect the papers, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the torn documents. "This is no ordinary disappearance, Hastings. Mr. Priddle has found something he should not have, and someone, it seems, has silenced him before he could share it." Lavinia, who had been standing behind Poirot, gasped. "You mean he's dead?" Poirot did not answer immediately, instead standing up and brushing his hands together. His face was calm, but his mind was working at lightning speed. "It is possible, mademoiselle, but this is no longer a game of the supernatural. No, someone here is playing a far more dangerous game, and we must find out who." The atmosphere at Blackwood Manor had reached a boiling point. The cold winds outside seemed to match the growing tension within the walls of the estate, and Poirot could feel the grip of fear tightening around each of the household members. What had once seemed like a series of harmless pranks or misinterpretations of the house's age was now spiralling into something far darker. Poirot had already gathered the evidence from Mr. Priddle's study: the torn papers, the blood stain, the absence of any clear explanation as to where he had gone. It was clear to him that the stakes had been raised. No longer was this simply a matter of inheritance or old family grievances. This was something far more sinister. He stood at the desk in Priddle's study, his fingers lightly brushing the scattered papers as he examined them closely. His mind was racing with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "this is not a matter of ghosts. No. This is something far more dangerous. A game played in the shadows, with each player hiding their true intentions." Hastings, who had been nervously pacing behind him, stopped. "So you're saying that the hauntings are a distraction? That someone is using them to cover up something more criminal?" Poirot turned, his expression unreadable but his tone certain. "Precisely, mon ami. Someone here is using the fear of ghosts to cloud the minds of those around them. The question is, who?" He glanced toward the door, where the household stood, watching them carefully. It was clear that one of them held the key to this mystery. But which one? The answer was still elusive, and Poirot knew that the only way to solve the case was to dig deeper into the psychology of the people involved. Poirot smiled slightly, though the expression held no warmth. "The game, Hastings, has only just begun." The drawing room at Blackwood Manor was dimly lit by the flickering glow of the fire, casting long shadows on the walls. Poirot, with his usual calm demeanour, sat across from Lady Rowena Blackwood, who was perched on the edge of her chair. Her face, though composed, bore the weight of something unspoken, an air of tension that she could not quite conceal. "Mon ami, Lady Rowena," Poirot began, his voice sharp yet measured. "You and your late husband, the Colonel, were not on the best of terms before his passing, I presume." Lady Rowena's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair as she looked away for a moment. "No, she admitted quietly. We were not. There had been disagreements, but I never wanted him dead, Monsieur Poirot. Her voice cracked slightly, though she quickly regained her composure. Poirot, never one to miss a shift in the tone of a conversation, leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Tell me, madame, of these disagreements. What were they about? Money, perhaps? A matter of inheritance? Rowena's gaze flicked to the floor, then back up to meet his. Yes, she said softly, her lips pressing together as if the words were difficult to say. He had changed the will. He was going to leave everything to Lavinia, his niece. I was being written out, Monsieur Poirot. I had nothing left but the house, and even that I feared was slipping away. Poirot's eyes gleamed with sharp interest. Aha, so the Colonel's decision to favour Lavinia caused great bitterness, but you would not, of course, have resorted to anything drastic over such a matter. Rowena's face flushed with a mix of anger and regret. I would never kill him, Monsieur Poirot, she said vehemently. But we argued, yes. The night before his death, we had a terrible row. I told him that if he didn't change his mind, I would be left with nothing. He mocked me, laughed at me, and then he locked himself in his study. Poirot studied her carefully, watching every flicker of emotion pass over her face. A heated argument, yes, and yet, despite your bitterness, you have no part in his death. Rowena's expression softened, a deep sadness filling her eyes. No, Monsieur Poirot. I may have wished things were different, but I would never harm him. Poirot gave a small, thoughtful nod. And yet, madame, you were the last person to see him alive. Tell me, what did you do after the argument? Lady Rowena hesitated before answering, her eyes flickering toward the door as if seeking an escape. I went to my room to think, but when I returned the next morning, he was dead. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. I believe you, madame, he said with a soft sigh, but it is not enough to tell the truth. We must find out what lies beneath the surface. Poirot turned his attention to the next person on his list, Miss Greta Lamson, the Colonel's nurse. She had been a figure of constant presence in the household, and her quiet demeanour seemed at odds with the growing tension around the manor. As she entered the drawing room, her gaze met Poirot's, with a brief flash of nervousness before she composed herself. Ah, Mademoiselle Lamson, Poirot said, his voice warm but probing. It is good that you have come to speak with me. You were, I believe, the one who cared for the Colonel in his final days. Greta nodded, her posture stiff, but her voice calm. Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I did my best to care for him, though the last few weeks were difficult. He was not himself. Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Not himself, you say? What do you mean by that, mademoiselle? Greta's hands twisted in her lap, the faintest tremor betraying her calm exterior. He spoke of things that made no sense. Hallucinations, perhaps. He believed someone was trying to harm him, that someone was out to get him. She paused, her gaze flickering to the window. I thought it was just the strain of age, but now I wonder. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. So you believe the Colonel's death might have been connected to these delusions? Greta's expression became guarded. I don't know, but I've always been loyal to Lavinia, Monsieur Poirot. She's like a daughter to me. I would never see her harmed. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Loyalty, mademoiselle, is a fine quality, but loyalty can also cloud one's judgment, n'est-ce pas? Tell me, was your loyalty to Lavinia so strong that it blinded you to any possibility that someone else might have had a motive? Greta's eyes widened slightly, and she looked away quickly. I don't know what you mean. I have nothing to hide. Poirot's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his mind was already working behind those calm eyes. Of course, but tell me, mademoiselle, why did you not mention these hallucinations before? Why wait until now to speak of them? Greta faltered, her hands shaking more noticeably now. I thought they didn't matter. I didn't want to cause more trouble, but now that the Colonel is dead, I realize everything is important. Everything. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, mademoiselle. Everything is important, and nothing is ever as it seems. Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings were led to the drawing room where Lord Adrian Blackwood awaited them. The young man was standing by the window, staring out at the fog-covered estate with an air of detachment, his posture tall but somehow weary. When he turned to greet them, there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at a troubled mind. Ah, Lord Adrian, Poirot began, his voice calm but deliberate. It is a pleasure to speak with you. I trust the manor is treating you well. Adrian's lips twitched, the faintest flicker of a smile. The manor is as it always is, a little too quiet, perhaps. Poirot took a seat, his eyes never leaving Adrian's face. I understand you are a man of interests, Monsieur Blackwood. Some of them, shall we say, quite unusual. Adrian's eyes flickered briefly, a fleeting moment of discomfort. Unusual? He echoed. I suppose one might call them that, yes. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his gaze unyielding. The occult, for example. I understand that you, how shall I say, have an interest in the supernatural. Adrian's face hardened, but he did not break eye contact with Poirot. I don't see why it's anyone's business, he replied coolly. The family has its traditions, and some of us wish to understand them better. Poirot's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Understand? Ah, but Lord Adrian, what exactly are you seeking to understand? The family curse, perhaps, or something more personal? Adrian shifted uncomfortably. There's no curse, he said, his tone flat. That's just superstition. But there are things we don't understand, things that we need to control. Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Control, that is the word, n'est-ce pas? Control over what, Lord Adrian? Adrian seemed to retreat into himself, his gaze once again turning to the window. I suppose it doesn't matter. All I want is to understand what's happening here, to protect myself from whatever's going on. Poirot's gaze remained steady, though there was an edge to his voice now. Protect yourself, you say. But from what exactly? The family? Or perhaps from the truth? Adrian turned to him sharply. The truth? He asked, his voice rising. You don't know anything about the truth. You don't understand what it's like to lose everything, to be forced into a position where you have no choice but to protect what's yours. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Ah, mon ami, I understand more than you think. You do not seek protection from ghosts, no. You seek protection from the consequences of your own actions. Adrian's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Poirot stood, his demeanour calm yet final. I think, Lord Adrian, you are hiding more than you realise, and soon we shall see if the truth can be buried any longer. Poirot and Hastings stood in Dr. Felix Wynne's study, an austere room filled with medical books and glass jars filled with strange concoctions. The doctor, though a respected member of the household, had never quite managed to convince Poirot of his complete honesty. The man's polished appearance and impeccable medical credentials seemed to mask something more unsettling beneath the surface. And now, Poirot had the unsettling task of reviewing Dr. Wynne's medical logs. With a sigh, Poirot flipped through the neatly written pages, his sharp eyes scanning each line with precision. Hastings hovered behind him, leaning over his shoulder. So, what do you make of all this, Poirot? he asked, glancing at the open book. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mon ami, one thing stands out immediately. These logs are incomplete. It is as if the doctor is deliberately hiding something he does not want anyone to discover. Don't doctors leave a few gaps in their records sometimes? Hastings asked, trying to be helpful, though it was clear he didn't entirely understand the significance. Poirot shook his head. It is true that medical records are not always perfect, but in this case, these gaps are too convenient. Look here. Poirot pointed to a section in the log where the entries for the days leading up to Colonel Blackwood's death were sparse. Some dates completely missing, others filled with vague generalities about the Colonel's well-being and mental state. Dr. Wynne claims to have been attending the Colonel for weeks before his death, Poirot said, his voice thick with suspicion. Yet there is no mention of a diagnosis, no detailed observations. What was it he was trying to hide? Hastings leaned in closer, his brow furrowing. So, you think he was covering something up? Mon ami, it is more than that. These gaps, they are intentional. A doctor's duty is to observe, to record the details of a patient's condition. Yet Dr. Wynne's notes grow more sparse just before the Colonel's death. Why? What happened during those days? Was he tampering with the medication, perhaps? Poirot flipped through more pages, his mind racing as he pieced the puzzle together. The symptoms the Colonel exhibited before his death, hallucinations, paranoia, are consistent with the effect of certain substances that might have been administered to him by someone with access to his medication. Hastings looked troubled. But why would Dr. Wynne do such a thing? What was his motive? Poirot's lips curled into a knowing smile. Ah, that is the question, my friend. A question I shall answer soon enough. His eyes glinted with determination. The doctor's omissions are not mere accidents. They are a key to unlocking the truth behind the Colonel's death. As Poirot and Hastings proceeded to gather information from the household, they were confronted with a growing web of contradictions. The alibis presented by each of the household members seemed increasingly difficult to reconcile, and Poirot's mind worked tirelessly to untangle the threads. They first spoke with Lady Rowena Blackwood, who had insisted that she was in her room the night of the Colonel's death. Her story, though believable at first, began to crumble under Poirot's careful questioning. "Madame," he asked, his voice calm but unyielding, "you said you were in your room that night. But tell me, did anyone see you there? Can you verify your whereabouts?" Lady Rowena's eyes flickered nervously. "Well, no," she said reluctantly. "I didn't have anyone with me, but I always lock my door at night. I've never had a reason not to." Poirot's brow furrowed as he examined her carefully. "But no one can corroborate your story. That is unfortunate." Turning to Greta Lamson, Poirot sought a more detailed account of her movements the night of the Colonel's death. She too had claimed to be alone in her room. "I had just finished my nightly rounds when I heard nothing unusual. I went to bed early that evening, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone defensive. "I had no reason to be anywhere near the Colonel's study." But Poirot, ever observant, noted the subtle tremor in her hands as she spoke. "Ah, Mademoiselle Lamson, you do not sound so certain. Surely you heard something in the night. A sound? A voice?" Greta shifted uncomfortably, but her eyes betrayed a hint of fear. I told you already, I did not hear anything." Poirot's gaze hardened. "And yet you claim to have heard the Colonel's voice at other times. A voice that spoke to you in the night." Greta looked flustered. "It was just... Yes, I heard things, but I did not hear him that night. I swear it." Poirot said nothing, letting the silence settle between them. "Interesting, mademoiselle. Very interesting. Next, they turned to Lord Adrian Blackwood, who had been unusually quiet about his whereabouts. He had told them he'd been alone in the library, but Poirot had learned that there was no one to verify his story. When Poirot questioned him, Adrian's eyes darkened, though he remained outwardly composed. "I was alone in the library, Monsieur Poirot, reading. I don't see why I should have to explain myself further," Adrian said, his voice cool but his body language tense. Poirot studied him carefully. But I must insist. The night of the Colonel's death, where exactly were you? You were in the library, yes, but were you alone?" Adrian's eyes flashed with irritation. "I told you, I was alone. There is no need to question me further." Poirot stood and paced around the room, his mind racing with the conflicting stories. The alibis didn't add up. Rowena's unverified presence in her room, Greta's odd defensiveness, Adrian's vague account of his time in the library. Each story seemed designed to divert attention from the truth. Hastings, growing increasingly frustrated, leaned in. "So what does all this mean, Poirot? Who is lying?" Poirot stopped pacing and turned to Hastings with a sigh. "Mon ami, that is the crux of the matter. These stories do not match, and that can only mean one thing. One of them is hiding something. But the question is, who?" Poirot paused for a moment before continuing. "Someone here is playing a game, a dangerous game, and we must uncover their true motives." Hastings, his face furrowing in confusion, looked around the room. "But Poirot, how do we figure out who? They all seem believable in their own way." Poirot smiled faintly. "The key, Hastings, lies not in what they say, but in what they don't say. The truth is always hiding in the silence." It had been several days since Poirot's arrival at Blackwood Manor, and the weight of the mystery seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The strange events, the whispers, the unexplained cold spots, the disappearance of Mr. Priddle had caused a strange tension to settle over the household. And it wasn't just the residents who were affected. Even Hastings, usually the more practical of the two, was starting to feel the chill of the manor's eerie atmosphere. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said one evening, his voice laced with unease, "I'm beginning to think there may be something to all this ghost talk." Poirot glanced up from the papers he was reviewing, his expression unchanged, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "Ah, Hastings, I see you have begun to entertain the possibility of the supernatural. Tell me, do you believe in ghosts?" Hastings shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously against the arm of his chair. "Well, I don't know. I've never seen anything that could explain what's happening here. And it's not just the sounds anymore. There's something about this house, something I can't quite put my finger on. I've seen it in the eyes of the staff. The way they look at each other, the way they move around the place like they're afraid of something." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze penetrating. "Mon ami, what you are describing is not a haunting. It is fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what has been hidden for so long. But tell me, Hastings, why do you believe this house is cursed? Is it the cold winds, the whispers in the night? Or is it that you are simply seeking an explanation for the unexplainable?" Hastings opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know, Poirot. It's just the way things have been happening. The missing will, the odd behavior of the family members, the disappearances. It all adds up to something more than mere coincidence. Maybe there is something we don't understand here." Poirot smiled faintly, his lips curling with amusement. "Ah, Hastings. The human mind is a curious thing, is it not? It seeks order where there is none, logic where there is only emotion. But let me assure you, there is no ghost here. Only a person. A person who is behind it all." Hastings looked at him, unconvinced. But if it's not a ghost, then what is it? What's really going on here? Poirot's smile deepened. That, mon ami, is what we are here to discover. The key to the mystery lies not in what we hear, but in what we observe. And what we observe, Hastings, will reveal the truth. The investigation had begun to take a subtle turn. Poirot, ever the master of details, had spent hours inspecting every corner of the manor, his keen eyes missing nothing. He had noticed small things, the way a picture frame had been slightly askew, a door that didn't quite close properly, the faintest trace of something on the carpet that could easily have been overlooked. To the untrained eye, these were trivial details. To Poirot, they were vital. One evening, Poirot and Hastings sat together in the library. Poirot, sifting through a pile of documents, while Hastings glanced over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the chaos. Poirot suddenly stopped, his fingers hovering over a page. "Ah, Hastings, here is something of interest." Hastings leaned over to see what Poirot had found. Poirot held up a small piece of thread, no longer than an inch, its vibrant blue colour almost hidden among the cluttered papers. "What do you make of this, mon ami?" Poirot asked, his voice low with intrigue. Hastings frowned, scratching his head. "A piece of thread, Poirot. I'm not sure how that could be of any use." Poirot smiled knowingly. "But that is the beauty of it, Hastings. You see, this thread matches exactly the fabric of Lord Adrian's coat. And do you recall how I observed the peculiar way he was pacing last night near the study? This small clue, my friend, may very well lead us to the answers we seek." Poirot stood up and turned his attention to a nearby table, where a faint but distinct scent lingered in the air. He leaned closer, taking a deep breath. "And here," he said, "is another clue, though more subtle. A scent, faint but distinct, the odour of lavender, similar to the one in the perfume worn by Mrs. Rowena Blackwood Hastings, looked at him, bewildered. "But what does it mean? Is this lavender connected to the thread?" Poirot smiled, a cryptic gleam in his eye. "Ah, Hastings, you are a good man, but sometimes you see the world too simply. The lavender scent is no accident. It leads us to someone who wishes to remain hidden." Poirot stood up, his fingers tapping the desk lightly. "These small clues, they lead to larger truths. And soon, Hastings, we shall uncover the identity of the person who is behind this twisted game." As the evening wore on, Poirot sat in his study, contemplating the pieces of the puzzle he had begun to assemble. The clues were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. He knew that he needed more, something to tie everything together, something that would make the truth undeniable. Without warning, Poirot picked up the telephone receiver with deliberate care. He dialed a number with practiced precision. "Hello," came the voice on the other end, and Poirot's expression hardened, his lips curling slightly as he spoke. "Mon ami," Poirot said smoothly, "it is time. Send someone from Scotland Yard. I believe the time has come for us to confront the truth. The game, it seems, is almost over." Hastings, who had been standing by the door, raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Scotland Yard, Poirot? What does that mean? Are you sure we're ready to take that step?" Poirot turned, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "Mon ami, I have no doubts. The case is clear now, and soon, Scotland Yard will have all the evidence they need. The truth will come to light, and those responsible will be held to account." With a final click, Poirot hung up the phone. He turned to Hastings, a small smile playing on his lips. "The game is nearly over, my friend," Poirot said, his voice calm but filled with unshakable certainty. "Now, we wait for the truth to be revealed." The grand hall of Blackwood Manor was draped in shadows, the flickering light of the candles casting long, jagged figures across the cold stone walls. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, but its warmth did little to dissipate the tension that hung thick in the air. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the assembled suspects with the quiet, unyielding intensity that had become his trademark. Behind him, Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting from one person to another. The manor's inhabitants, Lord Adrian Blackwood, Lady Rowena, Miss Greta Lamson, and Dr. Felix Wynne, stood in a semicircle, their expressions a mixture of suspicion, confusion, and unease. Each of them had been summoned by Poirot for this moment, and none could escape the inevitable confrontation that was about to unfold. Poirot's sharp eyes flickered over each one in turn. Lady Rowena, standing near the fireplace, had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face set in a defensive expression. Adrian, as usual, seemed cool and composed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of nervousness as they met Poirot's. Greta, standing slightly apart from the group, had her hands tightly folded in front of her, her gaze avoiding direct contact. Dr. Wynne, ever the professional, stood stiffly with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture betraying his discomfort. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings with a slight knowing smile, "this is the moment of truth. The game we have played, the questions we have asked, all of it leads us here. The final pieces of the puzzle are almost in place." Hastings nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a slight unease. "You really think we're about to solve this, Poirot? After all the strange happenings? It's hard to believe this is all just a game." Poirot's smile widened, his gaze lingering on the group before him. "Ah, Hastings, you must not let appearances fool you. This is not a matter of ghosts, but of very human actions. We shall soon see the truth, and then we shall understand how this mystery is solved." With that, Poirot motioned to the gathered group, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew that something was about to happen, something that would change the course of the investigation forever. Poirot stood before the gathered suspects, his posture straight and unyielding. He surveyed them one last time, his sharp gaze taking in every detail, the way Rowena shifted uncomfortably, the tension in Greta's clenched fists, the cold detachment in Adrian's eyes, and the faint nervous tick in Dr. Wynne's jaw. He knew that now was the time to strip away the layers of deception that had clouded the truth for so long. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice calm, yet filled with the weight of impending revelation. "It is time. Time to put an end to these false trails, these distractions that have clouded our understanding. You, my friends, have all given me something to ponder, but not all of it has been honest." He turned his gaze toward Lord Adrian Blackwood, who stood with a faint, defiant smile playing on his lips. "Ah, Lord Adrian, you, with your talk of family curses, your occult rituals, your search for something beyond the physical. You would have me believe that ghosts haunt this house, n'est-ce pas?" Adrian's expression darkened, but Poirot continued undeterred. "It is a clever ploy, my friend, but a ploy nonetheless. You hoped that your belief in the supernatural would distract me, that I would chase shadows while the truth lay right before us. But I see through it, Adrian. You do not believe in ghosts any more than I do. Your rituals, your curses, are nothing but smoke and mirrors, a way to mask your true intentions." Adrian opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot held up a hand. "I will not waste more time on these distractions." Poirot's eyes shifted to Greta Lamson, whose nervousness seemed to grow with each passing second. "And you, Miss Lamson, you have claimed to hear the Colonel's voice, to have witnessed strange phenomena. But I ask you, why are you so quick to believe in ghosts? Is it because you fear something more tangible?" Greta stiffened, but Poirot's gaze remained unwavering. "Your story, Miss Lamson, is a fabrication. You wanted us to believe in a haunting, but the truth is that your loyalty was to Lavinia, and you wanted to protect her from the real danger that lurked in this house. You saw the opportunity to mislead us, but I see through your deception." He turned then to Lady Rowena Blackwood, who was standing silently, her face pale. "And you, Madame. You too have tried to mislead us. Your jealousy, your bitterness toward your late husband for rewriting the will. It is a strong motive, but the truth is, you had nothing to do with the Colonel's death. You were, as we now know, simply an unwilling participant in this web of lies." Lady Rowena's lips trembled, but she remained silent. Finally, Poirot's eyes rested on Dr. Felix Wynne, who had been standing with an air of quiet defiance throughout the whole ordeal. "And you, Doctor, you, whose medical expertise should have led to truth, but instead you kept secrets from us. Your incomplete records, your unaccounted-for days. Do you think I did not notice? You manipulated the Colonel's medication to make it appear as if his mental state was deteriorating. But it was you who sought to confuse the mind of the Colonel, not a ghost." Dr. Wynne's face tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot paused, his eyes scanning the room. "These are the red herrings, the distractions that you all placed before me. But now I see the true picture. The game ends here." Poirot moved toward the center of the room, the dramatic silence surrounding him. He had dismantled the false leads, stripped away the layers of deception, and now it was time for the final revelation. The truth, which had been shrouded in mystery for so long, was about to come to light. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice low but filled with quiet authority. "You have all heard the stories. The whispers of a haunted house, the strange noises, the cold spots in the corridors, the voice of the Colonel calling from beyond the grave." He turned to face the suspects, his eyes burning with intensity. "But none of these occurrences were caused by spirits. No, my friends, these were all carefully orchestrated events. The ghostly apparitions, the disembodied voice, the moving objects, the sudden chills, they were all tricks designed to create fear that would cloud your judgment, that would drive you to act impulsively." Hastings, who had been silently watching the scene unfold, leaned forward. "But Poirot, how could anyone make a ghost appear? Surely it must have been some sort of supernatural force at work." Poirot smiled gently, turning to face him. "Ah, Hastings, you are so eager to believe in the impossible. But the answer is simple. It was not a ghost, but a series of carefully crafted illusions. Wires, speakers, and chemical smells, all hidden from view, designed to create the illusion of supernatural activity. A trick of the mind, mon ami." Poirot's gaze moved to each of the suspects, his expression stern. "Adrian, your occult rituals were nothing more than a cover for your true intentions. Greta, your haunting was your attempt to protect Lavinia. Rowena, you allowed yourself to be swept up in the madness, thinking it was the answer to your own pain. And Dr. Wynne, you—" Poirot's voice trailed off as he turned to Dr. Wynne, his gaze unyielding. "You were the mastermind. You planted the seeds of fear, knowing that they would grow into something greater. You wanted to drive Lavinia out, to keep the inheritance for yourself. The will was your ticket to wealth, and you stopped at nothing to secure it." Dr. Wynne's face turned ashen, but he did not speak. Poirot continued, his tone even, but filled with authority. The final piece of the puzzle was the signet ring, placed in Lavinia's bed as a final touch. It was meant to frighten her, to push her into a corner where she would have no choice but to flee. Hastings looked at Poirot, his face filled with awe. "So it was all a lie? A clever trick to create fear and confusion?" Poirot nodded. "Exactly, Hastings. Fear is a powerful weapon, and in the end, it is the mind that betrays us, not the supernatural." The gathered suspects stood in tense silence, the weight of Poirot's words still hanging in the air. The grand hall of Blackwood Manor seemed to close in around them, as though the very walls were closing in on the mystery they had all tried so desperately to conceal. Poirot stood at the centre, calm as ever, but his sharp eyes gleamed with the promise of the final revelation. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice cool and measured, "you have all heard of the missing signet ring, a symbol of the Blackwood family, yes? A valuable piece of history, and, as it happens, a key to this entire case." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air as he turned toward Lavinia, who stood at the edge of the group, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with anticipation. "The ring, it was found in your bed, mademoiselle," Poirot continued. "A most curious place for a family heirloom, n'est-ce pas? But the question, you see, is not how the ring ended up in your bed, but rather how it was placed there." The room grew still as Poirot's gaze shifted between the gathered individuals. His voice dropped lower, his words precise. "The Colonel's study, you see, was where the ring had been kept. It was in a place known only to a few, and I have discovered, through subtle observation, that the ring was removed from that study by someone with a specific knowledge of the Colonel's habits." Poirot took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he faced the group. "Who among you had access to the study? Who among you knew the Colonel's habits, his secrets, and his fears?" There was a moment of silence before Poirot spoke again, his voice ringing with clarity. "The person who took the signet ring and placed it so carefully in Lavinia's bed was no ghost. It was the person who had the most to gain from her fear, the person who stood to inherit everything." Poirot turned to Dr. Felix Wynne, his eyes locking onto the doctor's face with a sudden intensity. "It was you, Dr. Wynne, you who orchestrated this entire charade. You who used the ring as a final act to manipulate and control." Dr. Wynne's face went pale, his lips trembling, but he said nothing. Poirot stepped back, his expression calm but resolute. "The ring was the final piece of the puzzle, an attempt to scare Lavinia into fleeing, to make her believe that she was in danger. But the truth, as always, is far more simple. The real threat was never a ghost, but a man, Dr. Wynne, who sought to control the fate of the Blackwood estate." The room seemed to grow colder as Poirot's words hung in the air. Dr. Felix Wynne, the family physician, stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. His hands clenched at his sides as though he were preparing to protest, but no words escaped him. Poirot, ever the calm and calculating figure, stepped toward him with measured steps. "It is always the quiet ones, Hastings," Poirot murmured, almost to himself. "The ones who hide behind their knowledge and their facade of professionalism. They are often the ones who manipulate the situation from the shadows." Poirot turned his full attention back to Dr. Wynne. "You, Doctor, had access to the Colonel's medical records, did you not? You were the one who controlled his medication, who decided what he would take and when. It was you who, quite conveniently, could influence the Colonel's mind, making him believe that he was losing touch with reality." Dr. Wynne swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as Poirot's words cut through the silence. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. I was only trying to help him," he said weakly. "The Colonel's mind was deteriorating. He was, paranoid, delusional." Poirot's eyes gleamed with the sharpness of a hawk. "Paranoid, yes, but it was your actions, your manipulation, that made him believe in ghosts and conspiracies. You convinced him that his family was plotting against him, that he was in danger, but you did not stop there, did you, Doctor?" Poirot's gaze flicked toward the rest of the group, then back to Dr. Wynne. "No, you did not. You saw an opportunity to control the fate of the Blackwood estate, to take the inheritance for yourself, The new will, the one that favoured Lavinia, disappeared, didn't it? You destroyed it, along with any evidence of your actions. The room was silent, the gravity of Poirot's words sinking in. Dr. Wynne's face turned an unhealthy shade of grey, his hands shaking as he spoke again, but this time, his voice was filled with fear. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I only wanted the estate to be mine. I thought if I could make the Colonel seem mad, they would all believe it. They would all believe that Lavinia was the cause of his death. Poirot took a step forward, his voice cold but certain. You were the one who created the haunting, the strange noises, the cold spots, the voice of the Colonel calling from the beyond. It was all you. Wires, speakers, chemical smells hidden behind vents. You made it all, Doctor. You crafted the illusion, a grand performance to frighten Lavinia, to push her into a corner where she would have no choice but to flee. And when she did not, you escalated it, using the ring as a final blow to make her believe she was in danger. Dr. Wynne's eyes flickered with panic, but Poirot's words were unrelenting. You underestimated the power of fear, mon ami. Fear is a dangerous weapon, and it blinds the mind to the truth. Hastings, standing by Poirot's side, looked at Dr. Wynne with disbelief. You were the one who did all of this? For money? For power? Dr. Wynne nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Yes, I thought if I could manipulate the situation, I would be the one to inherit everything. I never intended to kill him, but the way things turned out, I was willing to do whatever it took. Poirot shook his head slightly, disappointment creeping into his voice. You had everything, Doctor, but your greed clouded your judgment. And now, all that is left is the truth. The grand hall of Blackwood Manor was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the steady ticking of the ancient clock on the wall. The tension that had been building over the last few days was palpable, the final pieces of the puzzle now falling into place. Poirot stood before the gathered suspects, his posture straight, his demeanour calm and composed. The drama was unfolding, and with it, the truth. You see, my friends, Poirot began, his voice cutting through the silence with its usual precision. This has never been a matter of ghosts or hauntings.